Welcome to my channel Limelight Leaks. Please share and subscribe and hit the bell icon for new updates. Smokey Yunick wasn't just a car fixer. He was a legend, made from being super smart and breaking rules. By the time he died in 2001, everyone knew his name meant outsmarting the system. But his biggest mystery wasn't written in rulebooks or recorded. In race records, it was hidden behind the locked doors of the best car garage in town. His famous workshop in Daytona Beach, Florida. For many years, racers, rule checkers, engineers, and even fans wondered about what really happened behind those walls. Some said Smokey was building engines years before anyone else. Others said he had plans NASCAR never let on the track. But no one knew for sure because Smokey didn't let just anyone in, not even close. The shop itself was a plain building, almost boring from the outside. But what it stood for was power, mystery, and pure new ideas. Smokey protected it like a safe, not because he was scared, but because it was his special place. It was where he broke the rules by following them perfectly, where he pushed the limits of speed, and where he left behind the unfinished parts of his career. Over time, it became more than a workshop. It became a fortress against big company, racing, red tape, and anyone who couldn't keep up with his smart mind. When Smokey died, his family and a few close friends were finally allowed to step inside and look around. They weren't just walking into a garage, they were entering a sealed legacy. What they found inside would prove the legend was real and will make the mystery even deeper. Smokey had taken secrets to his grave, but not all of them stayed buried. Some were hiding in plain sight, waiting to tell the world who Smokey Yunick really was, as cancer slowly hurt Smokey Yunick in the late 1990s. Those closest to him saw something different about the man who had always gone against the rules. The cowboy outlaw of the garage was becoming quieter, thinking more deeply. He stopped letting visitors come unless they were family or trusted friends. The smart interviews stopped. The garage hours got shorter. And when Smokey did talk, it was less about engine power and more about what he'd leave behind. He knew his time was running out. Still, there was no big goodbye tour, no tearful goodbye. To NASCAR, Smokey had always been a private man in a very public world. The garage became more than just his workshop in those final months. It became a safe for thoughts he wasn't ready to share. Close friends later remembered how he would sometimes sit alone, staring at old plans, flipping through notebooks, or just walking quietly between half-covered car frames like he was saying goodbye in his own way. But there were clues that something deeper was buried under the shop's dusty workbenches and behind sealed doors. He made mysterious comments. They weren't ready then, and they're still not, and joked more than once about unfinished business that'll outlive me. Those who knew him best thought he had projects left behind, not just unfinished, but hidden on purpose. Smokey had no interest in letting people rewrite his story after he was gone. But he also knew curiosity had a way of surviving death. When Smokey died on May 9, 2001, the family didn't just inherit a building, they inherited a mystery. The garage he left behind was like a time capsule sealed by a man who knew too much and trusted too little. No one, not even NASCAR, knew exactly what was inside. It wasn't until weeks after the funeral that the garage was finally opened to those brave enough to sort through Smokey's mechanical kingdom, gathered on a super hot Florida afternoon to face what Smokey had left behind. What they found wasn't just a garage filled with tools. It was like a museum of new ideas. Dust covered everything. Unfinished cars sat like sleeping giants covered in tarps that hadn't been moved in years. Workbenches overflowed with parts that didn't match any known engine. And drawers were filled with technical drawings drawn by hand. But what hit hardest wasn't how much stuff there was. It was the purpose. Every shelf told a story. One held dozens of carburetor prototypes, each labeled with mysterious notes in Smokey's handwriting. Another section of the shop was lined with boxes marked only with dates and engine codes, some talking about projects long forgotten by the racing world. One crate was simply labeled, "Don't touch until you know what you're doing." The deeper they searched, the more it became clear. Smokey hadn't just been building cars, he'd been building a message. There was no clear organization, but there was purpose. Plans taped to the wall were yellow with age, but still razor sharp in design. Pieces of what looked like experimental fuel systems were scattered across a metal table. At the far end of the garage, a locked cabinet contained what looked like secret letters between Smokey and key people from NASCAR. Letters filled with sharp words and hidden warnings. Smokey had filled this place with every ounce of rebellion and brilliance he had. And for the first time, the world would see what the outlawed genius had been hiding all along. Tucked into the corner of the shop beneath a canvas cover and surrounded by boxes of older parts, the team found something that stopped them cold. A fuel system prototype unlike anything anyone had ever seen. It was small, oddly shaped, and came with several handwritten notes from Smokey himself. The documents detailed a method of fuel squeezing and delivery that, if real, could have given a massive performance edge without breaking a single NASCAR rule at the time. It was efficient, it was sneaky, and most of all, it was never used. One note scribbled next to the diagram read, "They won't allow it. Too fast, too clean. Too smart." Another said simply, "If they won't let me race it, bury it." According to insiders who later spoke without giving their names, this system had actually been tested privately in the late 80s. It worked almost too well. Smokey had supposedly approached NASCAR to get the design approved for competition. Their response? A hard no. Officials called it unfair and potentially dangerous, though no official reason was ever given. Rumors say a few top NASCAR techs were invited to the garage to see it firsthand and immediately insisted it to be taken apart or destroyed. But Smokey didn't destroy it. He hid it. Whether out of pride or principle, he kept the system whole, stored in pieces and buried behind years of dust. To him, it was proof, not of cheating, but of ability. It was the result of decades of thinking ahead. It now sat there, like a time bomb of innovation, waiting for the world to catch up. What they found that day wasn't just a fuel system. It was a reminder. Smokey Yunick had been 10 steps ahead, even when nobody was looking. Hidden behind a line of dusty, rolling tool chests, the team uncovered what can only be described as an arsenal of unseen horsepower. Smokey had carefully tucked away multiple prototype engines. Some fully put together, others carefully taken apart and labeled in bins like rare fossils. These weren't just variations of known builds. They were mechanical oddities that broke the mold of 20th century race engineering. One engine featured a cross-ram intake design coupled with a radical dual plenum chamber setup, something that had never seen a NASCAR track. Another was built using ultra-light composite materials far ahead of their time with a handwritten note reading, "Carbon doesn't lie." One design included early electric assist technology, not unlike what modern hybrid race cars now use. The discovery left Smokey's friends amazed. Had he already figured out a version of regenerative braking? Torque vectoring? No one knew for sure, but what was certain is that Smokey wasn't just thinking about winning races. He was thinking about changing them. Some engine blocks had stamped serial numbers that didn't match any manufacturer. Others had the faint etching of Smokey's initials, side markings in code. There were even blueprints for powertrains that could integrate direct fuel injection at a time when that technology was still experimental in aviation. It was like stepping into a mechanical time machine where the future of motorsports had been quietly built in a Florida garage while the rest of the racing world caught up. The tragedy, these engines never roared. They were never raced. Never. Looked at under the heat of competition, Smokey had locked away not just inventions, but possibilities. And by doing so, he'd written a secret alternate history of motorsports, where the rules were broken, not by rebellion, but by imagination. Among the mechanical artifacts, they found something far more human. It's a worn, dented metal filing cabinet. Inside, dozens of envelopes, some sealed, some open, all handwritten. These were personal letters, some addressed to his family, others to old friends. But what stopped everyone cold were the ones addressed to NASCAR officials, past drivers, and even specific inspectors by name. They were never sent. One letter dated 1990 to read, "You never wanted the best. You wanted control. You'll get it, but you'll lose what made the sport great." Another, "You made me out to be a villain, but I was your best innovator. All I did was think harder than your lawyers. Tucked into the back was a folded napkin with scrawled words in faded pen. I gave them everything, and they still hated me for it. Those closest to Smokey always said he was sharp, proud, and unafraid. But these notes revealed something deeper: pain, betrayal, and a man struggling with how history might remember him. Some letters spoke of regret, like not finishing a car he'd promised to a dying veteran. Others hinted at fear, like the idea that racing had become too political, too sanitized, too willing to suppress genius in the name of sameness. There were lighter notes too. Jokes written to Richard Petty, a half-finished draft of a book forward he never published, but the tone was consistent. Smokey felt like a man who had built greatness and then been kicked out from it. These papers weren't just writings, they were raw emotion. The last unspoken truths of a man who had given his mind, soul, and decades of effort to a world that couldn't always handle him. Tucked behind a rusted sliding wall panel in the far end of the garage, they found what felt like a shrine. Room was dim, lit only by a single hanging bulb, filled wall-to-wall with trophies, framed black and white photographs, driver suits, helmets, and original rulebooks. Some items were neatly displayed. Others were stacked in no particular order, as if even Smokey didn't know where to begin cataloging the life he had lived. One shelf held a row of trophies from Daytona, Sebring, and Indianapolis, all bearing the names of drivers who had raced under Smokey's wrench. Another corner displayed faded jackets with patches from teams he'd out-engineered. In the center of the room was a workbench covered with tools, each labeled and preserved like a mechanic's altar. But what drew the most attention was a stack of old rule books, heavily marked up in pen, pencil, and even red marker. Smokey had annotated them with corrections, sarcasm, and notes like, "Nice try, but I'm still smarter." Pinned to the wall was a photo of Smokey beside his famous 7/8 Chevelle, smiling that crooked grin with a cigar clamped in his teeth. Next, too. In his own writing, this one made them rewrite the rules. There were binders filled with race notes, some from events no one even remembered he entered. Pages upon pages of lap time predictions, airflow studies, and engine torque curves. All this wasn't about ego. It was about truth. Smokey wasn't trying to show off. He was keeping records of proof that he was never just a rebel. He was a record keeper of his own misunderstood genius. Under a pile of mismatched carburetors and faded blueprints, they found something Smokey Yunick had never mentioned publicly. Leather-bound journal worn at the corners and wrapped in a strip of tape. It was filled from cover to cover with Smokey's personal thoughts dating back to the 1970s. This wasn't a mechanic's logbook. This was the internal world of a man who had never trusted the press, who had always felt misunderstood by the racing elite, and who had saved his most important thoughts for the silence of the page. The entries were raw, revealing, and at times philosophical. One page began, "You can't teach brilliance, but you can damn sure regulate it out of existence." Another entry from 1985. "Wondered how many of my best ideas died because someone with a clipboard didn't understand them." Smokey wasn't just angry. He was thoughtful. He wrote about his war years, the pressure of being labeled a cheater, and the loneliness that comes with being decades ahead of your time. One passage stopped the readers cold. It read, "I don't care. If they call me a legend after I'm dead, I'd rather they just admit I was right." Another, "I built things no one else dared to. Not because I wanted to win, but because I couldn't stand to see possibility wasted." There were poems, lists of ideas never built, sketches of parts that might have changed the industry, and a page titled, "If I Had One More Year," with 10 things he'd still wanted to try. The journal revealed not a rebel, but a restless mind, a man torn between greatness and grief. And it painted a final picture that no documentary, interview, or race ever could. Smokey Yunick, the misunderstood prophet of performance. Word of. The garage's contents spread fast. Within weeks, NASCAR officials reportedly visited the site. According to those present, they arrived quietly, asked for access. The frame was uneven, low-slung, and had no manufacturer markings. It had been hand-welded, reinforced with aircraft-grade tubing, and featured a suspension geometry no one could figure out at first glance. Rumors spread that Smokey had been designing a ground effects race car decades before the technology hit. The mainstream? They took copies of blueprints. They took photos of engine internals, but strangely, they left behind some of the most radical components, including that chassis. Why? No one knows for sure. Some claim it was too controversial. Others whisper it was a design NASCAR didn't want to be associated with because it challenged everything the rulebook was built to control. One former tech inspector, anonymously quoted, said, "There were things in there that would embarrass every race team today." Smokey figured out stuff we still haven't perfected. Whatever NASCAR's motives, their presence confirmed one thing. Even in death, Smokey Yunick had the power to make the sport nervous. When the garage doors finally closed and the dust settled on Smokey Yunick's life's work, those who had seen inside knew one thing. The man wasn't just ahead of his time, he was outside of it. His garage wasn't a collection of parts, it was a cathedral of rebellion. Every invention, every scribbled note, every silent protest against mediocrity told the same story. Smokey never chased fame. He chased truth. In a world obsessed with sponsorships, TV ratings, and sanitized competition, Smokey dared to be difficult. He asked questions no one wanted to answer. He solved problems that didn't yet exist. And most of all, he refused to be small. That garage in Daytona wasn't just where cars were built. It was where boundaries were broken, where innovation wasn't negotiated. It was demanded. So now, with the garage open and his secrets revealed, the racing world finally sees Smokey Yunick for what he truly was: a misunderstood genius, a wounded visionary, and a man who lived and died fighting for the freedom to think dangerously. The myth of Smokey Yunick didn't die with him. It's only grown louder, richer, and more undeniable. Because in the end, legends don't just live in memory. They echo in the machines, the minds, and the rules they force to.